how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be talking through my top 12 fantasy football players for the 2022 fantasy season. So these are essentially my round one redraft rankings for this upcoming year. We're going to be talking through strategy of when to target these players, talking through some ADP and all of that crucial stuff. But before we get into today's video, make sure to drop down, give today's episode a like, and click that subscribe button, turn the bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. And also, go check out some of the links in the description of today's video. It really helps out the channel here. And in that description, you'll be able to find some brand new stuff like SFS Weekly, which is a completely free service. It'll get you access to a piece of free exclusive content every single week from me here at SFS. It'll be one big drop with a recap of everything we posted for the week, as well as an article or a PDF of some sort of thing. This week, at the end of the week, we're going to be dropping my top 10 secrets to dominate your 2022 redraft leagues, so stay tuned for that. Again, that's SFS Weekly. It's just my Substack account in the description of today's episode. Also, if you guys are in need of a draft guide for this fantasy football season, go check out Underdog Fantasy. Deposit and use promo code SFS. As a new user, Underdog is going to double your money. Get a hold of me. Let me know that you signed up, and we're going to get you access to the draft guides for the 2022 season absolutely free on sizzlefantasy.com. So head over there and make an account if you haven't done so already. You can make an account for free, and then we'll get you squared away with that draft guide access right away. So thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video. Let's get started. All right, here we go. So my first player up on the board, our number one overall player for fantasy football here at SFS. Pretty standard, pretty straightforward, sticking with consensus. We're going Jonathan Taylor. His ADP on Underdog Best Ball formats is the 1.2 overall selection. So clearly he is the popular number one overall pick. Now his ADP was 1.1 last week, so it has kind of faltered a little bit, which is really interesting to me actually because Christian McCaffrey, who we'll talk about obviously later on in today's video, has actually seen his ADP fall as well. And Cooper Kupp has surged a little bit, so kind of an interesting dynamic as to who is being drafted ahead of Jonathan Taylor enough to make that ADP fluctuate a little bit. But it's nothing too significant nonetheless. The 1.2 pick, again, is the clear-cut number one choice in redraft formats for this season. He was the RB1 last year. It's just kind of that safe bet, if you will. Now, I don't necessarily think he's a lock to finish as the RB1 again this season, but what I do think is he's going to give you bona fide elite levels of production. And seeing what he was able to do in the Colts offense in the 2021 season with what I would argue is a less stable offensive situation than it is now, I feel much more comfortable with Matt Ryan as my quarterback in a run-first offense. Just being able to be a high-level game manager as opposed to Carson Wentz, who can drastically change the outcome of games depending on which side of the pendulum he's swinging towards in that point in time. He can either be great, he's got a rocket arm, he's got super high upside, so that offense can either be killing it, but he can also kind of, have a meltdown, and not necessarily, his turnover numbers weren't terrible a season ago, but he can get a bit reckless and ruin some drives pretty fast. So I think JT is going to have a very strong structure, and that ecosystem surrounding him will be very positive this season. And I also like what the Colts did in the draft this year. And again, bringing in Matt Ryan, you bring in Alec Pierce as well. I think that's going to help the passing game, help this offense get balanced up a little bit. And I think that Frank Reich calling plays for this team is going to result in a fantastic situation yet again. Just talking through some numbers here very briefly, one of my favorite things I mention almost every time I talk Jonathan Taylor is the red zone touches that he got a season ago, 92 of them to be exact, and 20 of those carries came on the goal line. So those are insanely valuable touches. I've also talked through this as well. Matt Ryan has not been in his career someone who thrives in the red zone, especially as of late. I mentioned, Julio Jones' red zone and touchdown numbers have not really been as elite as you'd expect them to be. And Kyle Pitts last season as pretty much the best pass-catching option on that team, especially after Calvin Ridley, had his issues. You're talking about a player who had one touchdown as a massive target in the red zone. So I think this team will continue to lean heavily upon Jonathan Taylor to get the job done in that area of the field. And obviously he's a workhorse build. He's a guy who is going to get a high level of volume game in and game out. And I think that this is just set up to be a very strong situation for Jonathan Taylor this season. Christian McCaffrey is my number two player still, despite, again, that small ADP slippage. His pick is the 3.2 via ADP on Underdog Best Ball. Again, use promo code SFS and get the draft guides for free this season. CMC for me is a guy who I think has equally as much upside, if not more, than Jonathan Taylor. I think he just needs to stay healthy. It's an availability thing. It's how comfortable are we drafting Christian McCaffrey. I actually had him, as crazy as this sounds, he fell to me at the 1-5 in actually yesterday's best ball draft episode, which was totally unexpected. I did not think I was going to get that lucky and be able to have him fall in my lap at the 1-5. I was expecting that I was going to either be taking a wide receiver or maybe even Austin Ekeler at that pick, but things turned out very well. We got CMC, again, a player who is just a phenomenal pass catcher, has that elite, dynamic fantasy skill set that everyone dreams about. You're talking about, your Austin Ekeler, but to a greater extent of talent. A DeAndre Swift, another guy who has that super advantageous rushing and receiving skill set split. And you've got a guy who, if you look at the numbers for the past 3 seasons, averaged 29.3 points per game in 2019, 30.1 points per game in 2020, and 18.2 in 2021. Now, that number did take a steep drop off the cliff there for this past season. However, he played 7 games, and you're talking about a guy who his offense was basically sputtering, and CMC was leaving contests early. So that all kind of factored into those situations, and those numbers would look a bit differently if you just solely took a look at the games where he played the entire contest. So again, you're getting phenomenal upside here. A guy who sees a level of rushing and receiving work that is almost unmatched by any other player in fantasy football right now. The one factor, again, is 10 games played the last 2 seasons. That's the huge red flag. That's literally less than a third of the games throughout the last 2 seasons. And we're just plain and simple going to need more availability, because at the end of the day, that's kind of a skill here, and that's something where I think a lot of people, and I think some of the reason, or really the primary reason that he fell to me at the 1-5 in yesterday's draft, is because people are getting sick and tired and are starting to lose confidence and lose faith. But if you can stick to seeing the upside, if you can be brave enough and grow a pair to draft him at the 1-2, there's a chance that things turn out really freaking good for you, because again, this player might just have the best skill set of any player in fantasy football, plain and simple. He just has to be able to be healthy and suit up and be out there. Cooper Kupp is my number 3 player right now. Now, this, you draft Cooper Kupp at the number 3 overall position, you're probably not feeling super excited. It's not necessarily the sexy pick there at number 3, but what it is a player who got insane volume. He's going to have a super dependable floor. His ceiling is quite good as well, I will add. And you're talking about, I almost feel like Cooper Kupp is a can't bust or, can't miss player. He's got such a phenomenal offensive infrastructure surrounding him that he's set up to succeed. And again, barring injury, you're going to get a fantastic situation here. Super durable player. Obviously did have the ACL injury at one point in his career, but for the most part, those are freak accidents rather than players being injury prone. And you've got a guy who can play super physical. I love to see, we'll talk through in a second here, his slot percentage in terms of his usage in that area of the field. He is unguardable in that slot. When you tell me that Cooper Kupp can break inside or outside and have a ton of grass on either side of him, you're going to lose that matchup if you're a defensive back, and you're going to get lined up against a player that is just lethal in terms of his route running. So again, super safe pick. He's got an elite floor, 191 targets, 145 receptions, and 25.9 fantasy points per game. Now, we are due for some drop-off. We're not going to see the same numbers. He led the NFL with 16 receiving TDs. It's not going to be exactly perfect like it was last year. He was the Triple Crown winner. I would be very shocked to see him do that again, but again, the situation for him is as good as any for the wide receiver position. So the encouraging things are that Kupp was number 1 in yards after the catch a season ago. Now, part of that can be attributed to the fact that you've got so much volume heading your direction that just naturally, by catching so many more passes than other players, you're going to accumulate more yards after the catch. However, it also speaks to his ability as a playmaker to read blockers, to use his legs after creating that catch, and then making something for himself, which is very impressive, and I expect him to continue doing at a very high level. So the one thing, again, that I did want to touch on is that 52.4% of snaps where he was lined up in the slot. Again, he is uncoverable from that position. He is very capable of lining up outside and being used on the boundary. However, he does his best work and his most damage in the slot when you essentially have to double team him as a defense, so he can't beat you deep. But he still will beat you laterally, because of that quickness and because of that agility that he brings to the table. Now, Justin Jefferson is my number 4 player for this season. He is someone who I think has wide receiver number 1 overall upside. However, I do question his ability to raise his ceiling further than what we've seen to this point in his NFL career. Now, his ADP is 4.1, which is right essentially where I have him ranked here at the 4th overall pick. I went back and forth with him and Austin Ekeler, and at times for me it's a coin flip whether or not I'll put Austin Ekeler, who, I just spoiled my number 5 player, but I could go Austin Ekeler instead of Justin Jefferson. That's not something that I would make a huge deal about because I do think that they are very valuable and have very high upside at their respective positions, but he did finish as the wide receiver, this being Justin Jefferson, as the wide receiver 4 in points per game for the 2021 season, yet he had an absolutely incredible year. And again, when I'm looking at these numbers, it's not impossible, but it's hard for me to see how he improves upon last season, where he had a 29.9% target share in Minnesota, so nearly a 30% marker of that Vikings offense. He's had back-to-back 1,400-yard or more seasons, his 1,400-yard season being his rookie year, and this season he went over 1,600 yards, which is very impressive. But the one thing that I think that he could maybe improve upon to take him to the next level, because again, he was also right up there in terms of his targets. So how much more volume can we feed his direction? He had 10 receiving touchdowns. So that's the one marker where you could say, well, if he pushes even farther to 14 or 15 receiving touchdowns, that could be the breaking point to take him to the next level. But you've also got guys like Irv Smith, Dalvin Cook, and Adam Thielen, who are also very capable in that area of the field. Obviously, Irv Smith just because of size. Adam Thielen has been kind of a touchdown magnet since pairing up with Kirk Cousins. And then you've got that very potent run game with Dalvin Cook that's going to be prioritized there in Minnesota. So I'm not super confident, and I'm not, I don't necessarily think it's a lock that number goes up, because touchdown production for basically every wide receiver except for Devontae Adams has been pretty inconsistent and pretty volatile on a year-to-year basis for basically every player. Now, Adams has the league lead since 2016 at the wide receiver position for reception touchdowns. But again, he had the double-digit marker, this being Justin Jefferson, in the 2021 season. And we're going to have to ask him to do more to surpass and push himself, elevate him into that wide receiver number 1 overall spotlight. And then the last thing I want to touch on here is he's also number 1 in air yards. So distance traveled from quarterback's arm to wide receiver's hands. No one had more air yards, that distance in between, than Justin Jefferson did in 2021. So basically, to make a long story short, this is a great player who, yes, does have wide receiver 1 overall upside. But I do think that he got pretty dang close to his peak with Kirk Cousins, I believe, last season. I think it's going to be very, very hard to best that year where he was dominant. He was fantastic. Now, he did actually have some lost opportunities, I will say. When I was watching games, I saw him drop catchable passes. So he left something hanging out there on the board. But again, it's going to take a significant change in that touchdown production, I believe, to put him over the edge, because you're getting in a run-heavy offense under Mike Zimmer. Now we'll see how Kevin O'Connell runs this thing, but I assume that they're going to be a very high-functioning offense, especially just because you've got fantastic skill players surrounding a very good game manager in Kirk Cousins. We'll see how things play out this year, but I'm very confident in him as a top 4 or 5 pick in this fantasy season. Austin Ekeler, his ADP is the 6.5 overall pick. I'm actually kind of surprised that it is this low. I think that just his pass catching skill set alone gives him such dominant upside. And you talk about the things he did a season ago, the 20 total touchdowns, the involvement in the receiving game, the effectiveness he has as a rushing threat when the Chargers decide to depend on him and lean on him in that facet of things. He's got that, again, that perfect fantasy skill set. He's not nearly as talented as a Christian McCaffrey or even a DeAndre Swift, but he is in a better offensive situation than both of those players, with Justin Herbert leading things with the surrounding talent, and Mike Williams. I just combined Mike and then went off on a spiral there with the name, and Keenan Allen. So you got Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. I literally just about did it again there. It's early when I'm recording this video, so still a little bit groggy today. I apologize for that. But you've got a guy who, again, is surrounded by fantastic talent, has a high-functioning offense, and had a 15% target share of that offense. So he is getting a really nice piece of the pie there in LA. And when you've got an offense that you can tie yourself to that is just a good situation to be involved with in fantasy football, that is why I love Austin Ekeler. And again, that offensive ceiling and production potential is what's able to net him those touchdowns, get him opportunities on the goal line, get him opportunities out in space as a playmaker to score, because he's very capable of creating for himself, and it just becomes a situation that stacks positives upon itself and gives you really nice upside. If you can walk into a season with Austin Ekeler as your number one draft choice and your first round draft selection, that's a win at the end of the day. Ja'Marr Chase is just after him for me, so my wide receiver 3 for this season. His ADP is actually a little bit higher than Austin Ekeler's at the 5.1 overall pick. So you're talking about basically what's happening here is those top 3 fantasy receivers are kind of slotting themselves in front of that kind of second wave of running back grouping here. But I'm still valuing the running back position very highly. I think that Austin Ekeler, despite the peak performances he had a season ago, will still be highly valuable just because of the positional scarcity, just because of the upside he brings to the table, and especially in PPR formats. If we're talking standard, then maybe you can make an argument in a case for something different, maybe even a Derrick Henry, who is a little bit more of a pure rusher. But Ja'Marr Chase for me is my number 6 overall player, so taking him one spot basically behind ADP. I love Ja'Marr Chase. This is a phenomenal player, one of the best wide receivers on planet Earth, and you're getting a guy with insane upside. Obviously, when you talk about Justin Jefferson and what he represents, what he brings to the table, you've got another elite player. It's kind of insane that these two guys played together at LSU, but what you get with Ja'Marr Chase that you don't get with Justin Jefferson is you get better quarterback play. Now, kind of the devil's advocate in me goes back and forth between these two players and really tries to break down and get into the nitty-gritty details of who could be better and why. And I'm actually going to dive into an episode later on this week where I think I might change up my opinion just a little bit. I'm going to do some heavy soul searching for analytic based and just gut and instinctual feelings, but it's so dang close between these two wide receivers who are obviously, back to back. Now I do have Austin Ekeler kind of breaking that gap in between them, but again, I'm updating the rankings at the end of the week, and it'll be a Friday episode, probably Ja'Marr Chase versus Justin Jefferson, and seeing which of those two players I truly like the most. But for now, I've got Jefferson just slightly ahead of Ja'Marr. But again, the one X factor that Ja'Marr Chase has that Justin Jefferson does not is the presence of Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow gives you elite downfield passing upside. You've got a player in Ja'Marr Chase who had a phenomenal rookie season and actually broke some of Justin Jefferson's rookie season records. And you're going to be able to see him build upon that here in year 2. The one thing that holds me up a little bit, though, about Ja'Marr Chase is the fact that I think that T. Higgins is more so near his prime. He's a very young player as well, 23 years of age. And I see him as a more significant target threat and a more significant factor in that Bengals offense than I currently see Adam Thielen as. Now, Adam Thielen is still a very legit player. He's still going to get looks. He's still going to score touchdowns. He's still going to be involved in that Vikings offense. But T. Higgins is a bona fide difference maker. I have him as a wide receiver 1 for this season. I do not have Adam Thielen ranked as such. I just think that the amount of volume and the amount of valuable targets T will dig into Ja'Marr Chase's workload is just a bit more significant. And then the question becomes, and we'll dive into this more later in the week, how does the quarterback play of Joe Burrow offset the production potential to steal targets from Ja'Marr Chase that T. Higgins brings to the fold? And then how does that factor in with the flip side of that, where Ja'Marr Chase, or Justin Jefferson has a lesser infraction on his target share, but lesser quarterback play. So again, for now, if you're watching today's episode, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on so you're not late for that video, so you check that out. But it is so neck and neck. It is so even to me that I'm going to have to dig even deeper into the numbers and try and find something that really differentiates these players so I can feel 1,000% confident in my assessment of the two. But the moral of the story for today is that these are two elite fantasy wide receivers. Jamar Chase has wide receiver 1 overall upside. Do not get that lost in the fold, in the mix of all of the gibberish that I've just spewed at you for the last 5 minutes. He's also a guy who, in terms of, you go back to the Joe Burrow effect, the downfield upside he has. He was ranked 3rd in deep targets a season ago with 30. So you're talking about a guy who is getting the football aired out to him and is cashing in and converting on a high percentage of those looks downfield. And you've got a guy who is number 9 in air yards. So 8 spots below Justin Jefferson. But again, I do not think Jamar Chase has scratched the surface of what his season-long fantasy ceiling can be because of how good and how dominant he is as a player. In his rookie season, again, he was already one of the best wide receivers on planet Earth. So absolutely love the situation with the top 3 receivers this year. I think this is a unique season of fantasy football where you've got legitimately 3 wide receivers that should be going in the top 5 picks, or the top 6 picks, rather, because we've got Austin Ekeler kind of spliced in that group. Last year, if you told me the running back group went 6 straight off the board, I wouldn't have fought you about it. I would have thought that was actually a great start to the draft for those first 6 players up on the board in your fantasy league. So Jamar Chase, for me, really, really great pick here at the 6th overall position, and that leads us into Derrick Henry at the 7.6 overall spot. Now, Derrick's coming off his first significant career injury. It's not something I'm going to freak out about. Again, I think it was just kind of a wear and tear injury. He saw every single major statistical category increase in production through, the first 5 or 6 seasons of his NFL career, which is ridiculous. You're talking rushing yards, rushing attempts, touchdowns scored. I believe it actually factored in some receiving work as well. There was 5 statistical categories. I need to go back and find the post, but I'd be digging for an eternity to try and find it. But it was ridiculous to see up until last season the growth he had as a player. Every single year he was getting better, scoring more points, having more production in the run game. This guy is a dominant one-of-one player, and I think we're going to get at least one more great season out of him here. Last year, he was on pace for an unprecedented back-to-back 2,000-yard season. You're talking 20-plus touchdowns. He had 10 touchdowns in his first 8 games. He would have played 17 had he been healthy for all of those. And he was actually starting to increase his volume as a pass-catching weapon in the receiving game. So ridiculous stuff here from Derrick Henry. And you talk about losing your top option in the receiving game. This football team might have to lean on the run game just a bit more. And if that is the case, Derrick Henry is in for a massive season. Now, the one thing that scares me a little bit is I see kind of an erosion of the Tennessee Titans offensive line. That does scare me a bit because I think that they need to be better than they've been in the past, especially for Ryan Tannehill in the passing game. However, if Derrick can get to the second level of the defense, linebackers and safeties are just not cut out to tackle this guy one-on-one. And we'll see what ends up happening this season. I do not think there is a world, even in standard leagues, where I'd probably take Derrick before Austin Ekeler this year. But it does make that skill gap a little bit smaller. But in PPR formats, I am very comfortable saying I'm absolutely drafting Derrick Henry after Austin Ekeler, just for that sort of comparison. But that's an ADP battle video for another time here. So stay tuned for that type of video as well. Here's our first wrinkle in today's episode. So DeAndre Swift is someone whose ADP places him outside the first round. However, I have him ranked literally twice as high as his ADP suggests here, up at my number 8 overall pick. Call me crazy. Why do I think that? Now, just because I have DeAndre Swift ranked here at the number 8 overall position does not mean you need to draft him here. His ADP, as it suggests, means you can get him at a discount and get him at a value. But I think that the skill set, the upside, the opportunity he brings to the table gives you top 5 overall running back finish potential. And if that is the case, why not draft him at the end of the first round? Plain and simple. I think that we are currently seeing a really interesting end to the draft board here, and as the offseason progresses, I can't wait to see how that group evolves and really solidifies itself as we get into late July and August here. But DeAndre Swift, again, is someone that, because of that receiving skill set, gives you things that other players just don't possess. And that's where you get that top 5 upside from. A guy who I was shocked, when I dove into the numbers here, was number 8 in running back snap share a season ago. So you're talking about a guy who Early on in the season, we saw a lot of Jamal Williams, but after that fact, I mean, he did get dinged up a bit last season, but DeAndre Swift is that dude for this Detroit offense. He's a guy who was second in target share at the running back position, a guy who was only 29th in red zone touches a season ago, only had 7 TDs, so you've got a ton of opportunity for increased production in that category, a guy who is 30th in carries and had just over 600 yards rushing, so the opportunity for positive game scripts with this Detroit Lions football team progressing in the right direction through the draft, through free agency, through just player development, it's all there. You've got an infrastructure which has been very poor through DeAndre Swift's first 2 seasons, and you're getting a guy who put up very impressive fancy numbers nonetheless, was very efficient because, again, that receiving work is going to give you better upside than a single rushing attempt will. And if they take that step forward as a football team, DeAndre Swift will take that step forward as a playmaker. Again, 7 total touchdowns in 13 games. That's basically just over half a touchdown per game. That number should go up. Again, when you're only 29th in red zone touches, that tells you your team's not getting in the red zone very much, especially for a player that was number 8th in snap share last season. Yes, you've got Jamal Williams, a larger back on that football team who could steal some work there, but DeAndre Swift should also see some of that work as well. We're not talking about, a Derrick Henry level dominant player in the run game, but this is a very competent player in the running department. Obviously, his best skill set is used as a pass catching playmaker out in space, but you are getting a lot here. And I think that DeAndre Swift is just a total package. So I'm very high on him, very bullish on him for this season. And I will be drafting him. If he's sitting there at, the late first round, top of the second round, I'm taking him every single time. And I've already scooped him up in a healthy amount of best ball formats. I cannot wait to keep drafting him more and more throughout, this upcoming fantasy football season. So that leads us into Dalvin Cook here at the number 9 pick, again, ahead of his ADP at the 10.7 overall selection. I'm a bit surprised to see Dalvin Cook's ADP slipping like it is this season. I just think that this offense is in such a good spot right now. Yes, Dalvin Cook has really not played more than 14 games in an NFL season. Yes, I think that we've maybe seen, quote-unquote, the best of him, but he is still a running back with high-level RB1 finish potential, and a guy who is incredibly explosive. You've got again, offensive situation where he finally has an offensive-minded head coach. They're actually talking about using him more split out in the receiving game, which I'll take that. I think that's just a bonus and a plus to his efficiency and ability to rack up points in a quick manner. And you've got a guy who is honestly still one of the best running backs in the National Football League. I think we're undervaluing Dalvin Cook this season. I think that he's a steal at his current ADP of a 10.7, so basically the 11th pick in the draft. I'll take that every time. You're going to have a quick turnaround on the end of that snake cycle there, and you can grab up another running back or a wide receiver one or a Travis Kelce, whoever the case might be. I think that Dalvin Cook starting off your draft in the late first is a fantastic way to go, and I'd be very excited about that. Joe Mixon here, his ADP is 13.4, so you're talking an early second round pick. I'm taking him late first round again. In that kind of rotation of the opportunities for a DeAndre Swift and Dalvin Cook. All those guys, love these guys late in round 1. Why wouldn't you want to tie yourself to this Bengals offensive situation? Joe Burrow has been the magical difference maker for this football team that has increased the ceiling, increased the production potential. You're talking about a guy with a very high ceiling because of the team's ability to get in the red zone, to give him high volume workhorse touch counts, a guy who was 3rd in carries a season ago, and top 5 in red zone touches. And you're seeing those numbers progress forward in the right direction because, again, Joe Burrow, that passing game can get the football down the field quickly and effectively and get them in striking distance to have those very, very valuable touches inside the 20-yard line of opponent territory. So if you're telling me that Joe Mixon is going to fall into the second round of drafts this year, I don't know why we're not signing up for that more and more often and seeing that ADP push closer to the first round because, again, I think you're getting a phenomenal offense here, a workhorse in that offensive situation, an improved offensive line, mind you, so a team that's gotten better in that category this season as well, and a guy who is a capable 3-down running back that can do some work in the receiving game as well. So Joe Mixon, very optimistic about him as well. Najee Harris, a guy I'm having just a little bit lower than him now. His ADP is 8.7, so that means you're seeing him go before Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, and DeAndre Swift, who I all have ranked ahead of him. Yet for me, I'm not going to tell you I'll be surprised if Najee Harris leads the NFL in touches again this season. I think he's in for a humongous workload and volume count this season. But I worry about the efficiency and how high the offensive ceiling is for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. Will they be able to get him enough effective and valuable touches with Mitchell Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, who I do like Kenny Pickett. I think that he's heading into a very positive situation here. But year one for almost every rookie quarterback can be a bit bumpy, especially when you're not viewed as a transcendent talent. I think back to kind of the last rookie quarterback who wasn't seen as, that next guy at the quarterback position, like in terms of being a generational quarterback talent, being a Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott type combo, where it was a run-first offense and they were able to absolutely wipe everyone off the face of the earth, and Zeke was this ridiculous RB. But that football team had a once-in-a-decade offensive line, and this Pittsburgh Steelers team does not have that. So even if Kenny Pickett can kind of manage this, just be a high-level game manager, I don't think Najee's going to have that level of efficiency. I don't think this team is going to score nearly as many points or put Najee Harris in positions to score touchdowns in the red zone as we might hope for. Yes, the situation should not get worse than what it was last year. It could arguably get a little bit better, but we'll see how things play out here. I'm not insanely optimistic about Najee Harris. Again, he's easily going to finish as an RB1 because he's going to touch the football so many times, and as long as he can stay durable, he's going to put the work in rack up fantasy points slowly but surely. But I'm not exactly closed-minded to changing my opinion. It's just that I think at this point in time, I would much rather invest in the Bengals offense with Joe Mixon. Honestly, the Vikings offense as well. I think that the offensive lines between the two teams are very comparable, but I think that the ceiling of the Vikings is a bit higher. And then I'll take the fantasy ceiling of that pass-catching workload that I expect DeAndre Swift to get and some increasingly more positive game scripts. I'll take that as well. Najee Harris is a very capable, skilled pass catcher in the receiving game as well. But at this point in time, I'm just a little bit lower on him. But again, not super opposed to shuffling things up here down the road. It's still early June. And then Travis Kelce here at number 12. So his ADP is 11.3. This is as simple as getting a positional advantage at a spot with a lot of positional scarcity. Obviously, the tight end position is one where there is not a ton of elite level producers just growing on trees here. But Travis Kelce is somebody that I expect to be in for, yet again, an insanely high workload. He has 8 or more touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 seasons. So you're talking about a guy who is getting work in the red zones. And again, we just talked about this with Justin Jefferson, but TD count can be kind of that thing that spills you over the edge here. And just the fact that Mark Andrews was putting up more touchdowns last season, to me, is what was kind of the difference maker between him and Travis this past season, despite the fact that Travis had more volume. You've also got a guy who has 5 straight 120 or more target seasons, so that volume is heading his direction, and he's absolutely in store for some more volume than even he saw last year, just because Tyreek Hill is no longer in-house. They brought in a slew of other assets and other weapons to try and make plays for Patrick Mahomes, but Travis Kelce will still be the first option for him this year. And again, I think his touchdown count could potentially balloon here again this year, with Patrick looking for a reliable face and a dependable guy in that area of the field. So I love Travis Kelce here at the 112 pick, and I think if you're going to go any direction, Travis is definitely a safe bet to take as the first tight end off the board. I'm definitely taking him ahead of Mark Andrews this year, despite the fact I love Mark and think he'll be very, very productive again this season. I think it's a safer bet to go with the volume and the upside that the situation is placed in front of Travis Kelce, with Tyreek Hill no longer being in that situation for the Chiefs. So thank you guys so much for watching today's episode. It was top 12 players again for the 2022 fantasy football season. If you enjoyed, remember to drop down, click that like button, subscribe to the SFS channel. Go check out Underdog Fantasy. When you deposit again, you're going to get double your money up to $100, and the draft guides on sizzlefantasy.com absolutely free. Rankings, must-draft players, sleepers, busts, all that great stuff, exclusive articles, weekly rankings, in-season lineup advice. I'll set your lineups for you guys, so you can get, again, all that stuff for free on Underdog Fantasy, or you can get it for $5 a month on sizzlefantasy.com. Again, promo code SFS on Underdog. And go check out SFS Weekly as well, We're going to be posting some of those exclusive articles on there absolutely free, and making some additional content that will be exclusive to SFS Weekly just for joining that area of things there. So thank you guys. I'll see you next time. Peace out.